Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. CommentQ Learning Week Day 4 is about to begin. Before we start, please allow me to share a few technical details. As with yesterday's session, today's webinar will be conducted in English. Live captions are available in the Zoom application. To activate them, please click the CC icon and choose English or Indonesian. This webinar is also being live streamed on our YouTube channel BPPK CommentQ RI. That's all the information. Let us now begin CommentQ Learning Week Day 4, Future Competencies. Gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome back to CommentQ Learning Week Day 4, Future Competencies. First and foremost, let us express our gratitude to God Almighty for granting us the opportunity and good health to gather virtually in this webinar. It is my great pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to the Director of Professional Development and Learning Quality Assurance, Ministry of Finance, Bapak Nana Riana, and our distinguished guest speaker, Professor Thomas Calvert. My name is Nyayu, and I'm honored to be your host for today's event. Today is the fourth day of the CommentQ Learning Week 2026. We would like to welcome you to this webinar series across 4 days, with the theme of Future Competencies, Developing Future-Ready Competencies for a Transforming Economy. This theme reflects our shared commitment to continuous growth, refining our expertise and expanding our capabilities to navigate an evolving economic landscape. We are delighted to welcome hundreds of participants joining us today via Zoom and YouTube. Thank you for being part of this meaningful learning journey. Dear participants, to officially open this webinar, we are pleased to have the opportunity to hear the keynote speech by the Director of Professional Development and Learning Quality Assurance, Ministry of Finance, Bapak Nana Riana. Good afternoon, Bapak Nana. How are you today, Bapak?
Good afternoon. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Bapak. We are delighted to have you here in this webinar, Bapak. Okay, without further ado, the screen is yours, Bapak Nana.
Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, Tom in Edinburgh, and good afternoon, everyone in Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues and participants of CommentQ Learning Week 2026. First and foremost, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our speaker today, Thomas Calvert from the University of Edinburgh. I hope my pronunciation is correct. We are honored to have him join us as the distinguished speaker for today's seminar with the theme Developing Future-Ready Competencies for a Transforming Economy. His perspective on organizational behavior, system thinking, and leadership in complex environments offers valuable insight into the competencies required in this new era. I also welcome our participants to this webinar. Today's discussion centers on a critical question: how do we ensure that our people, our institutions, and our leadership capabilities remain relevant in an economy shaped by rapid technological change, global uncertainty, and increasing policy complexity? Distinguished participants, global evidence shows that the competencies required in this environment are shifting at remarkable speed. Employers expect that 39% of workers' core skills will change by 2030, driven especially by advances in artificial intelligence, big data, and digital technologies. Skills related to analytical thinking, system thinking, technological literacy, and resilience are projected to grow fastest in demand between 2025 and 2030. These figures underscore that the future work is less about fixed job descriptions and more about dynamic capabilities, continuous learning, working across boundaries, and making sense of complex systems in real time. Indonesia is experiencing this transformation very directly. The country's digital economy is estimated to have reached more than 90 USD billion in 2024, making it the largest in Southeast Asia. At the same time, national projection warn a digital talent shortage of 3 to 6 million people by 2030, a gap that risks slowing innovation, weakening competitiveness, and limiting the state's capacity to regulate and support emerging sectors. In the public sector, studies show that many government employees still struggle with digital tools and that generational differences in digital literacy create internal divides. Younger civil servants tend to adopt technology more readily, while older cohorts often require more structured support and training. These realities create a risk that policy ambition outpaces institutional capability. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ministry of Finance has recognized that digital transformation and future-ready competencies are inseparable. Our digital transformation vision explicitly set out to transform the ministry's business model, digitalize business processes, and upskill human resources by adapting digital technology on a secure platform. The central pillar of this effort has been the modernization and expansion of e-learning. By 2021, utilizing Community Learning Center (KLC) as the learning management system, the ministry reported a 70% reduction in training costs through e-learning. In parallel, the ministry has developed the Core Tech Administration System (CORTEX), which aims to integrate taxpayer data, strengthen compliance monitoring, and improve service efficiency. Digital treasury systems such as PAN have standardized financial management processes nationwide. As of 2025, tax revenue reached 89% of the annual target by December, reflecting stronger compliance monitoring supported by data integration. These initiatives take space within a national context where digital talent and public sector skills are seen as strategic priorities. Government-wide targets emphasize that Indonesia will need around 9 million people with high-level digital literacy by 2030. The Ministry of Finance effort to expand e-learning and modernize its processes position it as one of the leading institutions in this broader push. Distinguished participants, however, future-ready work is more than digital skills alone. The World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs analysis highlights that emerging technologies are driving demand for analytical thinking, system thinking, and complex problem solving alongside technological literacy. Skills such as creative thinking, resilience, leadership, and continuous learning are projected to become increasingly important between 2025 and 2030. In Indonesia's case, this means that Ministry of Finance staff are asked to navigate a landscape where the digital economy, green transition, and demographic change all shape fiscal policy choices and implementation. They must be comfortable working with large datasets, digital platforms, and cross-sector partnerships while maintaining strong ethical standards in environments where pressures and incentives are changing. Competencies such as system thinking, data literacy, collaborative skills, and adaptive leadership become essential to support transformation agendas. For the ministry, building these competencies requires an integrated approach. The challenge is to ensure that every officer has both the opportunity and the encouragement to engage in continuous development. Dear participants, as you listen and participate, I invite each of you to reflect honestly on your own strengths and development needs. Which future oriented skills do you already practice in your daily work? Consider your role in shaping the learning journeys of your team. What experiences can you design or advocate for that will stress competencies in meaningful ways? Let me close by warmly inviting you to engage deeply in today's seminar. Ask questions, share your experiences of working in transforming economy, and challenge both yourselves and each other to think ambitiously about the competencies needed for the future. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to have a rich and insightful discussion. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Bapak Nana, for insightful and inspiring opening remarks. We would love to have you till the end if in this webinar. However, we understand that you may have other commitment, so please feel free to leave this webinar at your convenience. Thank you once again, Bapak.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now move to the main session of today's webinar. Before we begin, please allow me to share a few housekeeping notes. Please kindly keep your cameras on and microphones muted to minimize disruptions. The presentation will run for approximately 45 minutes, followed by a 20-minute Q&A session. If you are joining via Zoom, you may click the raise hand button and I will call your name, or submit your question in the Zoom chat and I will read it on your behalf. If you are joining via YouTube live streaming, please submit your question through the live chat feature. Additionally, please remember to enroll in the course on the CommentQ Learning Center, or KLC, and complete the feedback form available in the course to receive your certificate. Dear participants, now let's get started and give a warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, Professor Thomas Calvert, who will deliver today's talk, Developing Future-Ready Competencies for a Transforming Economy. First, allow me to briefly introduce his profile. Thomas Calvert is Professor of Work and Organization at the University of Edinburgh Business School in the United Kingdom. Prior to joining Edinburgh, he was an early career fellow at the London School of Economics, Department of Management. He has over 15 years of experience in teaching, researching, and consulting in the fields of human resource management, change management, and organizational behavior. His research explores how individuals in organizations interpret changing boundaries, perspective, and limits to their work, with particular emphasis on diversity, technology, change, and ethics. He currently serves as co-editor-in-chief of Management Learning Journal. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Thomas Calvert. Good morning, Tom. How are you?
Good morning from Edinburgh and good afternoon to, I think most of you, it's the afternoon.
Yes.
Thank you for the invitation to speak as part of your wonderful learning festival. And I hope you can find some interesting materials in my presentation, and I look forward to some discussion and questions afterwards.
We can wait to hear from you too, Tom. All right, without further ado, the screen is yours, Tom.
Thank you. Okay, so once again, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the invitation. The keynote was very interesting, and thanks for the warm introduction as well. So as mentioned, I'm going to spend about 45 minutes talking about developing future-ready competencies for a transforming economy. I've already been introduced very nicely, but as you heard, I'm currently Professor of Work and Organisation at UEBS, the University of Edinburgh Business School in the UK. And as you heard, also 15 years or over 15 years teaching change management, organizational behavior, and HR. And that relates to my research interests into people's changing experiences of the world of work, with the emphasis on various change trends around diversity, technology, ethics, and change management. I initially had a background in psychology, and then I developed further into organizational behavior and working in a business school and applying psychology to the workplace. I will be talking quite a lot about a sense-making perspective today. That's often a framework or a theory that I use to think about the world of work, and how people make sense of a changing world around them in terms of how to interpret, make decisions, take actions, understand their environment, either as an individual, but also in groups with other people, how they coordinate to come to an effective and adaptive understanding of what's going on around them and figure out what to do next. And also, as mentioned, I've recently taken up a position as a chief editor at Management Learning Journal. If you're interested in the journal, you can click on the link in the slides later. It publishes a lot of interesting work around skills, management development, leadership development, and always new papers coming out, new studies. Many of them are open access to download and have interesting perspectives. So if you're interested in that, I hope you will have a look at the journal. I'm not going to talk about all my research today. I don't always research competencies directly, but as we heard in the keynote, a lot of my research relates to systems thinking and adaptation to change. Sometimes my research looks at failure. So it looks at where things have gone wrong and tries to understand maybe what has failed to happen and maybe what needed to be in place. So I've looked at air crashes like the Air France disaster. In a complex system, the pilots faced an unusual set of conditions and they couldn't make sense of the situation in time to regain control of the plane appropriately. So this gives insights into maybe the training that people need when they're operating complex systems and the kind of leadership and crisis management that is needed to ensure that these systems are as reliable and resilient as possible for the humans interacting in them. I've written about trends that have of technological change, like big data analytics, and how these change trends have demanded new competencies for us over time in terms of the complexity of the data that we have to interpret and draw insights from. I've also looked at other organizations where they have achieved successful coordination. So in the UK, we have an organisation called the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, or the RNLI. And this is an organisation that relies on volunteers, so people who undertake unpaid work to rescue people when they are in trouble at sea. So if they have an accident in a boat or in the water, a team of volunteers will go and rescue them and provide them with help that they need. And so people are basically undertaking dangerous work without being paid for that work. But as teams, they face that danger together and they manage to develop strong bonds and effective coordination. I've also looked at hospitals and healthcare with researchers in the United States, and we've looked at culture change and shared leadership in hospitals, which are another example of complex systems. And we've looked at how to cultivate shared leadership and a competency which I would call perspective taking. So where you develop your ability to empathize with different professional and occupational groups. So in this case, you had nurses, doctors, paramedics, administrative staff, all different perspectives that come together to deliver effective healthcare in a hospital, but how to improve the understanding between those groups as part of a culture change intervention. And we were actually able to show that that led to better healthcare outcomes for patients in those hospitals. And finally, just as a final example, I've looked at the legal profession and some of their change that they're experiencing in Singapore. And we looked at this from an ethics perspective and how professionals experience challenges around how to preserve their values and the moral meaning of their work when they have to undertake work under pressure for corporate clients. And there's a strong emphasis on efficiency and profitability, but also a threat to their moral and ethical reasoning. So the general theme of my work is often people in complex systems. Sometimes they're experiencing a lot of change. Sometimes it's overwhelming and they find it difficult to make sense of that change. But under conditions, humans can often achieve incredible feats of resilience and coordination if the conditions are right and the competencies that we try to develop are appropriate. I've written a lot about diversity and inclusion. I'm not going to go into all that work here, but you can look at my Google Scholar page online. You can look at my University of Edinburgh webpage for more information on some of my other research. And perhaps unsurprisingly, my future research, because I have to be future ready as well, as we all do in the wild west of your theme, I'm also looking at the moment at how to continue my work looking at sense-making, but in the context of generative AI and also hybrid working. And I'll talk a little bit about those future and ongoing contexts in my presentation later on. So I don't know if some of my previous students would remember this, but when I first started teaching HR, I had always an interest in thinking about future skills. I quite like that we're using the word competency today because I think competence includes skills, but it's an important broader label because it as well as skills, competence also includes knowledge and behavior. Nevertheless, the word skills often gets used quite a lot. And we're often seeing reports and research that is trying to predict future work skills. As you'll see on this slide, the interesting thing is this is an old piece of research from 2011 that was actually trying to predict the skills we would need in 2020. And I'm sure nobody knew at that time there was going to be a pandemic or other changes that were coming. As we know, most predictions, it's impossible to predict things perfectly. But I also find it interesting to look back at some of these reports. And actually, I think some of their predictions are still very meaningful. So you can see on the left that some of the drivers of change are still very much things that we're experiencing coming into 2026. So changing demographics, increasing complexity of data and systems, the development of new media that we use to cooperate and communicate, changes in our organizational structure, and also in our global connectivity and global relationships as well. I am biased to liking this report because it has sense-making as one of the top future skills, and that's a view that I share, but you can also see a range of other important skills. And as I say, even though this report was first published in 2011, I think it's a pretty robust insight into skills that we still need in 2026 and maybe going forward towards 2030. So you can see some of the skills are around social skills. I would say sense-making is about critical thinking. It's about trying to find meaningful interpretations of complex problems, to find ways forward, to make decisions and take action. But you can see creativity, technological skills, maybe particular forms of technique and ways of working, so having a design mindset. And number 9 is interesting, being able to manage our cognitive load so we don't feel overloaded or distracted when we're trying to process different sources of information. Virtual collaboration was very important during the pandemic and continues to be an important and evolving way for us to develop our skills and competence. So I find these schemes quite interesting, but what is my own view in 2026 and some of the things that I will continue to discuss in this presentation is, for me, as I've said, I think sense-making capabilities are an overarching competence that we all need in the 21st century. We all do sense-making in our daily lives, but there are challenging questions about how to develop effective sense-making as our world changes around us, coming up with interpretations that are meaningful to ourselves and others for working adaptively and resiliently in complex systems. And this relates to various other competencies around process thinking, and as I've mentioned, perspective taking, the ability to adopt and understand things from other people's points of view when they maybe have different backgrounds and different expectations, different frames of reference. Closely related to sense-making is change management capability. And again, for me, this is another overarching, very broad area of competence that if we're going to develop more specific skills and competencies, we need these broader ones as foundations. For me, it is about continuous change readiness, and that doesn't mean feeling overwhelmed or exhausted. It means dealing with change in a way that is sustainable, that is manageable, that is a routine that we feel we can cope with. Sometimes we use words like agility, but also we have a reliability and a stability that allows us to adjust on an ongoing basis. This also relates to change leadership. And as we heard, I think, in the keynote, the need for adaptive leadership, leadership that is organic and is in tune with its environment, mindful of the changing circumstances around it, and often that is able to become dynamically changing in style when it faces a changing context, and often taking distributed forms as well. Obviously, those top 2 points are very general areas of competence. Underneath them, I think, we have a lot more specific domains and areas of knowledge and skills that we need to consider in the future to be future ready. We could talk about any number of things here, but I think things like sustainability, digital skills, financial skills, health and well-being skills, those are all key pillars to any future skills strategy, in my view. As we experience technological change, though, there are interesting and dynamic questions about hands-on skills that still require human hands-on capability. We might also think that, at least for a number of years, some of these skills will be AI-proof. AI will not be able to completely do them or replace them. And this maybe relates to forms of interpersonal skill, where humans have to work closely with other humans, but also physical, dexterous skills, where people use craft and trade skills that are not easily completed through automation or AI. And these are all more specific areas that I see as complemented by the 2 more meta capabilities above of sense-making and change management. Then we can also talk about our own skills profiles. And I think in the future, we are going to have a difficult mixture of the depth of our competence with the breadth, the broadness of our competence. Sometimes in professional development, we talk about T-shaped skills, shaped like the English letter T, where you have some broad bar across the top of the T, but you also have a vertical bar in the T to signify that there is some depth in a particular area of competence. So we need areas of specialization, but we also need general competencies as well. And as it is affecting many things, AI may also be able to help us with getting that balance right. It may help us to specialize in certain areas, but it may also help us to connect areas of competence and enhance some of our general abilities as well. So I'm not going to talk about sense making on every slide. This is probably one of my final slides about sense making, but it is an underappreciated drive in our economies that people have strong motivations to try and gather and attend to and process information to understand what's going on in their immediate experience, in their organization, in complex systems, and just in their everyday lives. Often we are on a quite automatic autopilot with our sense making. We rely on simple understandings that are familiar to us and that have worked well in the past. However, when we face surprises or something unexpected happens, we have to shift and develop our sense making to be more adaptive and resilient and mindful. And that's this kind of metacognitive capability where we have to redirect our attention and maybe say, what's going on here? Something different is needed, and we need to seek out additional information. This is, for me, a powerful psychology, organizational behavior perspective of sense making, because it helps us understand people's state of mind, their judgments, their preferences, their decisions in a slightly different way from more basic economic explanations. The fact that people have different frames of reference, or what we might call different mental models, in how they bring knowledge and expectations to come to different views on the same situation. It's a powerful motivation. Often people try to find a positive meaning, but they also try to find a meaning that maybe has enough detail that allows them to solve problems and find a way to act that will get them to the outcome they need. So this can explain many things, like people's curiosity, maybe their lack of curiosity, maybe they're bored because they don't feel that there's an interesting sense-making challenge. Maybe they get into a flow of activity where they're able to be productive because things fall into place for them, and various other preferences and belief systems. For me, and thinking about future-ready competencies, sense-making is important when it highlights failure, as I've mentioned. It can show that as humans, we have limitations. We cannot always make sense of our environment. It can become very dynamic, very complicated, and we sometimes have to make trade-offs. When we don't understand the full picture, we have to find a way of trying to stay organized, even when we don't have all the information we need. And that may involve experimenting, it may involve questioning, it may involve being mindful that we may have a wrong interpretation. We need to update our understanding. So for me, these are important meta-psychological capabilities. They have a motivational quality in motivating our decisions and behaviors. In recent times, even in 2026 already, there's a lot of discussion, particularly in Western business outlets like Harvard Business Review, around how we are very overwhelmed by transformational change. So some people feel we have too many big, bold transformational change programs, and that these are draining our energy and not helping us get ready for the future. Even though that's what they're trying to do, they often drain our energy and they leave us feeling a bit demotivated and confused. Instead, there is an argument that leaders should try to break change down. And so instead of big transformations all the time, trying to have more agility and continuous strengthening of adjusting the systems that we already have in a more sustainable way. So these steady adjustments that will compound progress in a more resilient, steady way over time. This means thinking on an ongoing basis about the realities that are changing around us, maybe keeping problems a little bit smaller so that we can make sense of them more effectively, rather than these big transformations that just confuse us and disrupt us. Focusing on things that people can value and commit to, and then trying to align them between different elements of our systems, rather than just a big quick fix that treats some program or some vision but is a little bit in isolation, and then a year later we have to have a new program to replace the old program, but we're not sure whether this has been successful or is actually making things worse. So in the last 10 years there's been some discussion that maybe all management is change management, and that bigger change is not always better or what's needed. This is echoed in yet more articles that have already appeared in the first weeks of 2026, why keeping up with change and our competence for keeping up with change feels more difficult than ever in some organizations. So changes are stacked in the sense that we cannot wait for one change to finish before another change begins, which is quite difficult. They can be very fast and open-ended. They can be interconnected. And Gartner, the research consultancy, have called this ungovernable change. It's not easily governed by traditional leadership and transformational change. So leadership competence, again, is about how do we build better change competence as a routine capability in our everyday business processes. Partly this is about pacing, and it's about readiness for change, not overloading people and expecting them to have endless enthusiasm for these big change projects, but actually thinking about more what Gartner called change reflex skills. So on an everyday basis, being open to new experiences, having effective time management, understanding how work connects to the surrounding business context, using technology effectively, working well with diverse others, regardless of their different background or expertise, and regulating our emotions effectively. So all of these things help us to become a bit more comfortable with continuous change, and we build these reflexes by practicing them, and they make our reactions to change more intuitive in the micro moments of our everyday work. I'm going to talk a little bit here about generative AI as well. So I think when we talk about future-ready competence, we need to think a little bit about different language and terminology. So this was a Deloitte report that said, well, you can talk about work as a kind of big outcome where we maybe involve humans defining the work that we want to do, and we use technology as a tool to do that work. But we can also talk about jobs, and jobs are a very human concept. It's work that humans do. We have job titles, we have roles. And this is where we become concerned that maybe there will be job losses because AI replaces jobs. But at the same time, AI does not necessarily replace jobs because jobs are made up of tasks. So tasks are the specific activities that maybe are part of jobs and part of work, but AI may automate some of them and not others. It may free people up to work on new or different tasks, and it may not replace tasks or do them for the person, but it may enable them to do them more quickly or more effectively. And then finally, we have skills, which is another different concept or piece of terminology here. And those are things that AI may have skills, but also humans may have skills, and they may combine to complete the tasks and achieve the work outcomes. So we're increasingly looking at how we use this language and to try not to use it in isolation, because if we just focus on jobs, then maybe we don't have a full understanding around tasks and work and skills. There's a trend for job deconstruction as well. So often people will talk about skills-based transformation and breaking things down and mapping skills rather than having job titles. This can lead to tensions, and I think it's important that we don't try to dismantle jobs too far. We've seen problems in the gig economy, and that there is a bit of balance needed here. So obviously, it can be good for employees to have autonomy and to move between different pieces of work and develop many different skills. But on the other hand, if managers have too much control over that, it may not be the most positive experiences for the employees. Employees can feel detached. If they don't have a proper job, they may be left wondering what it is that their work is trying to achieve and how it fits in to a sense of belonging or a bigger purpose. It can also be hard for employees to grow if they're continually moving from one skill set to the next or one project to the next. And actually, as humans, we need to balance that with some stability so that people can have careers and develop as well. So we need some guardrails in place where we focus on things like skills and skills-based transformation. If we use algorithms and managers, we risk excluding employees to an extent, and they may feel that they don't have very good fit with the work that they're being asked to do. They also may feel a lot of anxiety and insecurity about where their next skills and jobs are going to come from. And so managers are still very important, and jobs are still very important for supporting employees through transitions in their careers and their development. We heard in the keynote the World Economic Forum reports about the future of work. Here, when we think about future-ready competencies, scenarios are important as well. And so this year, the World Economic Forum has proposed 4 scenarios around AI and the future of work. On the right-hand side, we have scenario 1 and scenario 3 are slightly more positive scenarios in terms of using AI to drive change, either in a very rapid way in supercharged progress or in a more gradual way where we have humans and AI teams working together. There's a slight risk if the progress goes too fast in the top right, that governance and regulation will struggle to keep up. So actually, probably the scenario 3, the co-pilot economy, is one of the most positive scenarios here. And on the left-hand side, we have more negative, more challenging scenarios. So in the top left, we have rapid displacement of the workforce. I think most people would agree we want to avoid massive disruption and job losses where workers are replaced by widespread automation too quickly, and that creates a lot of risk. In the bottom right, we have another negative scenario, but maybe less rapid. So we're still not finding meaningful ways to apply AI to the future of work, and we're not seeing the growth or resilience that we would be hoping for. So what does the World Economic Forum say we should do? Well, they talk about so-called no regrets strategies. So whatever scenario we're moving towards, all of these strategies will remain important, but they are quite challenging. And so you can see there's a lot of different areas that we need to work on. So it's aligning talent management, governance, thinking about culture and trust, thinking about the different occupations and markets, the different demographics, and the different strategic partnerships that we're making in our systems. I've written myself about particular considerations for upskilling workforces for the AI era. And I've emphasized things like the need to bring together people with different attitudes towards AI, whether it's early adopters or people who are more skeptical, to have a culture of open and balanced discussion and a strategy to understand and update where AI can help, but also where AI can't help, and to try and be clear on that. To not take a path of change that is too disruptive, so not to rip and replace segments of our workforce too quickly when we implement change, because this will lead to unacceptable risk. We need to be aware of the trade-offs. So some companies may be too quick to replace junior workers with AI, and that would be a very risky strategy in terms of the future learning and development of the company. So what I suggest we do is to try and map our systems with care, to think about the people, the tasks, the technology and the structures together and not in isolation. There's also an ethical component in terms of trying to uphold principles of good quality, decent work from a human perspective. So work that helps humans to feel productive and supports their well-being. We know that technology can help with safety and reliability, but we need to weigh that against human intervention, human comprehension, and human oversight of technological change. Lenovo have been talking about an example of technology and engineering talent in the UK, and they argue that this is changing our talent management approaches to our competencies. We are changing job interviews to become more targeted around the environments that we're going to face in the future, more based around scenarios where we will need to use AI, but also guardrails that stop us from over-relying on AI and encourage us to talk about and reflect about how we're using the AI and to explain how we're using it in our competence. This will look different at different career stages, and it will affect how we onboard and develop new employees as they come into our organizations. And we need to remember we want to put the human being first, ideally, plus some additional machine capability. So talent management, to be future ready, it's important that it's embedded in realistic conditions, that it encourages us to adapt, but also think critically about how we use AI and expect other people to use AI to support their talent and their competence. We should ideally see AI as a long-term partner and not a shortcut that may damage our skills in the longer term. One way of thinking about this is also SWP, or strategic workforce planning. So ensuring that we have the right, when we talk about future ready, we mean that we have the right people with the right skills in the right places at the right times, but also with an acceptable level of risk. And we keep looking at our workforce plan to think about how best to prepare for different scenarios. We can use a strategic planning approach where we look at the workforce that we have today. We look at the supply of workers and competencies that we're getting, but we also look at changing patterns of demand that may lead to gaps, as we heard in the keynote in Indonesia, thinking about skills gaps, thinking about how to fill those gaps and develop capabilities in an action plan that we can deliver in future years. There are many different ways to do this from a strategic workforce planning approach, and I'd encourage you to look more at this if it's of interest to you. We can keep thinking about a balance of different elements. Sometimes we can buy the capability, we can build or develop it. We might be able to borrow it through different sources. We can look at retaining employees, moving employees around, balancing a mixture of strategies, and technology is always part of this, whether it replaces part of our capability by doing it for us, or it augments our capability in enhancing the way that we are able to do it. It also relates to learning and development strategies and having them delivered in ways that are continuous and agile. So again, from a sense-making perspective, we need to encourage teams and individuals to think from a meta perspective, to ask questions. What is the skill I really need? How am I going to get it? Who will help me to develop it and practice it and apply it? What do I need to do right now? And how will I get feedback and know how fully I'm developing it? What does a role model look like? And how will I engage with those role models? Even here, well, in many ways here, AI itself can help us upskill. So even if we're upskilling for AI or something else, AI itself can help in learning and development. And we can use different apps in different areas, whether it's for the content, the skills themselves and defining them and mapping them, the knowledge and performance support, or the personalization of our journey or pathway from being a beginner to being an expert. But learning and development can be difficult to do when we're busy getting on with our day jobs. So people will say things like, my manager doesn't care about my learning. People just put me under pressure to perform, and that trumps or is more important than learning in the day-to-day work. We're told to celebrate failure as a learning opportunity, but sometimes people may feel that they cannot afford to fail, that they're scared of failure. So we're so busy working at work that sometimes we're not learning as fully at work as we could be. And of course, learning itself is a special form of work. We need two types of learning. We need learning that is incremental and happens one step at a time, but sometimes we need to take a step back and we need a bit more space and time to have learning that truly transforms our point of view. And this may require more dedicated time, space, and investment, not just half a day of boot camp, but actually maybe a completely shift in perspective by spending a few days in leadership development or a strategic retreat. We need incremental as well, but transformative, if we leave it or neglect it, we risk not giving people the chance to learn more fully and develop their capabilities through curiosity and imagination and truly deep reflection. And companies are trying to improve their learning and development strategy. Sometimes corporate learning can be boring, but there may be ways to improve it. So Disney have a culture in their business. Learning has to support creativity. So in their approach, it's not good enough for learning to be a boring experience or a limited experience. People need to be able to think in an open, creative way, and they use playfulness and gamification. The demand for ambitious learning is increasing, partly because of generative AI, but also because many of us are working remotely or learning using other technologies. We also have an aging workforce in many parts of the world, an aging demographic population, but lifelong learning is an important experience there. But what we often find in organizations is chief learning officers or CLOs don't always feel that the learning approach is aligned enough with the strategic priorities. So ways to deal with this include making your learning more agile, designing it around strategic priorities, not just the current role that people are training for. Designing experiences that actually encourage application of what people have learned and not just a checklist of what they know. Not just measuring whether people have participated in learning, but actually how it has led to improvements in outcome KPIs. And creating dedicated new routines and structures. So if you're doing generative AI training or learning, actually having events where people can come together and criticize and think creatively and experiment with prompting AI in the context of their company. Regardless of how we approach learning and development, technological change can have very different impacts on our work. And I think it's important to be aware of their implications and threats. So as we've seen, technology may substitute for pieces of work or tasks, but it can have many other effects too. And it's important to be aware of these. It can transfer our work to different people or different places in the organization. Sometimes it changes the need for physical proximity. So it may mean that we can connect remotely, just like we are today as part of your Learning Festival week. It may create entirely new tasks or entirely new jobs. Number 5 is very often very positive and what we hope for, that it will augment or enhance existing capabilities, allowing us to do them more innovatively or more efficiently. Number 6 is something that is quite negative, but is often overlooked. But what we've learned in the past is that technological change can often lead to stress. It can encourage people to do more work, but work that they are worried about the quality of their work. And they feel pressured to use AI, for example, to do many, many different things, but they're not sure if it's helping them prioritize or do high quality work. And that can be stressful and unsustainable. So if it's becoming too intense for the workers, it's not leading to a good experience of technological change. Turning briefly to leadership, in leadership theory, we have a model called Cynefin, which some of you may have heard of, but it's a Welsh word, so it comes from the Welsh language, and it basically means that leaders need to adapt to the habitat or the environment that they find themselves in. And so you can see, I won't spend too long on this because of time, but you can see that as the environment becomes more complicated or disorganized, leaders may need to take a step back and take a different approach. So in simple situations, leaders can delegate, and a more simple traditional competence is okay. But as environments become more complicated, They may need to consult with experts. They may need to take more time to experiment with their followers. If it's very, very urgent, they may need to be more quick and decisive. But then when the crisis is over, they then need to change again and shift back and forth between these different approaches. This is similar to some of my work in Sensemaking, where I say that some people are engaged in primary sense-making. They work on the front line. They work very close to frontline operations, and things are happening there, like disruptions or surprises, which means they need to reflect on their work and then carry on and then pause, maybe reflect on what's happening, maybe get an outside opinion and then carry on. But we also have many people that are what we call secondary sense makers. And these are people who are not directly involved in frontline work, but they still need to understand the primary work that is going on. So this might be top managers, it might be designers and engineers, it might be regulators or policymakers. And their job is more representational sense making. So they are working out of the frontline context, and they are outsiders to an extent, but they still need an understanding of the system. And so this leads to challenges in our competence when we try and understand people who are working in different parts of an organization. So you've got your frontline operators, and they'll have their priorities, but you've also got engineers who may look at the context very differently, and you've got executives who may look differently again at the context of the organization. So if these different groups don't have an aligned understanding, then they fail to communicate and learn from each other. And the frontline context, the context of the operators, is particularly important because that's where people are actually using technology in their workflow. And it's always a bit messier and more complex than when the context of when the technology was first designed, before it went out into the real world, into the field. You have the design context, but things that happen in the context of use are often more unpredictable. So a lot of my work looks at how to recognize these differences and to encourage cross-functional learning across people with these different points of view of the system. In 2026, you can relate some of the risks of this to our competence with AI. So if people are laid off too quickly, then or too much, then that will be too quick, and we won't see any gains in productivity from AI quickly enough. People may have concerns about the organizational culture and some of the contradictions around how performance is going to be improved. And we are seeing risks associated with the use of AI. It can make people feel stressed. They can produce what's called work slop, which is low quality work, and that then reduces productivity. We're seeing problems in hiring and recruitment where there's not enough humanity in the process to improve the kind of quality of the experience. There's cybersecurity risks. There's also, though, opportunities for people to take alternative career paths, and they maybe learn different trades or crafts that are less directly automated by AI. It's not all about tech prodigies and who learns the latest ChatGPT skills. It's also about process thinking and how to actually unlock AI value rather than just being able to use the tools in a more procedural basis. We may also see activism and political and legal disputes as employees demand greater rights and compensation for their role in training technologies in their own competence. So if you were asked to train a digital twin to do your job, you might not feel very happy about not being paid or retaining a right to that intellectual property that you're inputting as a human into a technology. So these are all risks to be managed, and I think we need to think about how we as humans can be future ready. I find it an interesting question. What will humans always, or at least for the next many years, be better than AI at? And this article proposes that there are 4 areas where humans are uniquely important and will continue to be so, and that those are emotion, complexity, physicality, and creativity. Now, we could debate some of those and the progress that AI is making. I would put sense-making under number 2, under complexity, but it's also human motivation. We are motivated to help each other when we make mistakes. We're motivated by the unpredictability of human beings, and we've evolved a social interest in each other, that it is a problem if AI threatens some of those things. I think it's still true that AI is better for well-defined domains and problems. I think we have to remain open to how AI may complement our competency. And augmentation, we can use AI for particular tasks, for particular steps in our journey, rather than it replacing entire fields of human activity and human enjoyment. If we survey thousands of workers, we can see that there are distinct preferences for humans for particular processes and experiences. On the other hand, we should remain open to the fact that people genuinely prefer AI for powering certain things. So 24/7 availability, speed and efficiency, in some cases neutrality, and this rapid retrieval of documentation and information. Nevertheless, we do see across thousands of workers around the world that people, for the moments that matter most in their employee experience, it is human trust that drives us forward. And we are seeing that AI adoption often fails to lead to the progress that we hope for. And this is because in different industries, employees have different beliefs and anxieties about the relevance of AI to their competence, to their identity as professionals and employees, and whether or not it is actually going to affect their job security and to what extent. Depending on how it's managed, employees may use AI in a superficial way, but not really be committed to integrating it into their work. So the question is, how do we convert experimentation into more deeper and lasting and meaningful impact? And the answer is that leaders need new competencies to attend to the psychological and contextual challenges of how people are using AI, not just seeing it as rolling out a new technology and not just giving people new training or new policies, but actually starting with the reality that your industry is facing and the mixture of beliefs and fears that your specific workforce may have. And then you can tailor your management and your leadership to address those specific reactions more meaningfully. So if it's people's fears, that you may need to reassure those fears. If it's a belief that AI doesn't matter, then it may be a need to address that in a different way. So many of these problems come back to my idea of change management being a future competence. AI models are not necessarily bad or weak, but we do need designs and change management to support their implementation. So one framework has talked about the 5 R's. So a simple way to build an infrastructure, a human infrastructure that supports AI, are roles, responsibilities, rituals, resources, and results. And this gives us a more standardized backbone that makes us think through in a more structured way how to use AI to drive change. But it also retains some flexibility too. It sees AI adoption as a behavioral change problem, not just purchasing and investing in new technology. Because humans do have very strong reactions. They may resist disruption. We can often overreact when AI makes a mistake. And we often, whether we're right or wrong to do so, prefer the familiar human contact in certain experiences. So having a behavioral, human-centered approach to the entire AI adoption cycle. Often companies focus a little bit on adoption, but they neglect the rest of the cycle. And for me, as with many things, this can be viewed as a sense-making process. It's how people interpret, understand, and integrate AI into their daily work. I only have a few more slides. I know I'm a few minutes over time, so please just bear with me, and then we'll turn hopefully to questions and discussions. I only have 2 more slides, actually. I just wanted to use hybrid working finally as another example of where we can develop our change management and other areas of competence to be future ready. So what we've seen, particularly in the UK and in America, we've seen return to office mandates. So forcing workers to come back into the office maybe 4 days a week or 5 days a week. This is not a great response. It focuses on the wrong problem because it has a static, narrow policy for dealing what is essentially a complex period of transformational change that we've been going through since about 2021, post-pandemic, post-COVID-19. If our competence is to be truly future ready, we should see hybrid and remote working as a transformational change problem and use change management competence to address it. So this means rather than having a simplistic policy that forces people to come back into the office, we actually think more deeply about how people work together to drive outcomes, not just where people work, but how people work. So return to office mandates, I don't know if many companies have been using these in Indonesia, but they have been much debated in other countries and cultures. They can be criticized as being a policy trap. So employees, we find, resist this change. They may refuse to come in 4 or 5 days. We may monitor the situation and find they only come in 2 or 3 days. And then managers get confused and distracted about how to enforce the policy rather than thinking about how the workforce could be more productive. And evidence does show the benefits of hybrid and remote work for productivity, reduced turnover, and diversifying people's involvement in the workforce. If we think of it from a capabilities perspective, hybrid working can improve the attraction of talent. It allows us to measure results rather than just presence and turning up at the office. It supports team development because teams can lead on their own hybrid arrangements, and it can encourage them to reflect on how to collaborate more effectively. And we can invest in continuous learning and improvement as we try and understand hybrid working over time. So again, for me, I think you can view this as an area where we can develop our sense-making competence and our change management competence and our leadership competence by redefining how we think about concepts like productivity and connection in a more decentralized world, rather than clinging to an outdated office-centric view. That doesn't mean people shouldn't come into the office at all. It just means having a rigid, narrow, static policy is an underdeveloped response. So finally, I just want to finish with some conclusions. I've mentioned 2 main areas which I think are very broad, but I think for me they are 2 of the most important capabilities or competences as we head into the 21st century, head further into the 21st century, I should say: continuous change readiness and sense making. How can we support those capabilities? Well, I think mapping out complex systems, mapping out where people reach their limits, where we need good control and accountability will be important. I think also mapping out specific areas, not just jobs, but work, skills, tasks, and thinking about humans and AI relationships in those mapping exercises. Having smart organizational designs that give us some flexibility, but also some structure that help us to move forward on our change journey. And also dynamic leadership that recognizes the complexity of the environment and engages appropriately with that complexity. I don't have time to talk about them in this presentation, but if you are interested in further approaches, I would encourage you to look at least 2. One is resilience engineering, which talks about how to engineer systems to develop resilience competencies. So how to monitor the environment and adapt to surprising events and changes. and also socio-technical systems. So these are approaches that really emphasize optimizing the systemic relationships between people and the work that they do, and technologies and the work that they're doing. So you can look those up online. There's plenty of resources, but those are the names of two approaches I would recommend for more practical details. And I would also say, don't forget frontline actors. Again, I don't know about Indonesia, but in the UK during COVID-19, our frontline workers were very, very important. Our nurses, teachers, doctors, people who were still going physically out to do work. They have huge cognitive potential in our economies, in that it's not that other people don't, but let's not forget these many, many workers who are going to the front line. They're doing very physical and manual work, and they're very much out in the field, out in the real world. Some of us who work, like myself, often, not always, but often, who work on laptops and do knowledge work, we are a little bit more detached from these other kinds of work. And so the people who work at what we sometimes call the sharp end of the system, they have a lot of information and experience that we still need to tap into and empathize with. So for me, you've got generative AI, hybrid working, but also frontline work. And those create a kind of joint context for how I see the future world of work. And for whatever it's worth, my final takeaway point, for me, my passion, my interest is preserving the human experience. So I'm very interested in how we empathize. Hermeneutics is how we interpret our world and how we interpret our shared world together as it changes around us. So for me, when it comes to things like AI, I place a lot of value on human-first approaches, responsible approaches, user-centered philosophies. And I think if we don't, then we risk degrading the human experience and losing some of the very cherished and valuable things that make the human experience sustainable and productive and help us to flourish. So I'll finish there and I'll stop sharing my slides. I hope I'm not too far over time and we have some decent time for questions as well. Thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you very much, Tom, for that insightful and forward-looking presentation. Today you reminded us that being future-ready is not just about adopting AI or new technologies, but about developing the right competencies, especially sense-making and continuous change readiness. You also highlighted how AI, hybrid work, and evolving job structures are reshaping tasks and skills, and while leadership, workforce planning, and organizational design must remain human-centered. Most importantly, you emphasize that transformation succeeds when we preserve meaning, ethics, and the human experience at work. All right, dear participant, we now open the floor for questions and reflections. If you would like to engage with Tom, please raise your hand, introduce yourself briefly, and keep your question concise so we can accommodate several participants. Tom, before we start, would you prefer to answer the questions individually, or would you like me to gather 3 questions first?
I'll try it individually, but if there are a lot of questions that go together, then we can see. But let's try individually, maybe.
Okay, I will see if there are any participants in the Zoom. All right, I would like to call upon Bertrand. Bapak Bertrand, please tell us your name and your institution, and then you can ask your question briefly to Tom.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, right. Firstly, thank you very much for the presentation, Tom. My name is Bertrand. I am actually from the University of Edinburgh from last year's batch of IHRM, from your class as well in change management. So very interesting, very brilliant presentation, because I think the world in 10 years is something that we would really want to know what it's going to look like. And what I would like to know more is about the generalization of the capabilities which you have mentioned. I think you've touched upon earlier on that sense-making, they have several steps to it, they have several levels to sense-making itself, and AI application across different industries, they have different applications as well. I would like to know more just how are we able to generalize the capabilities which may be needed, and what are the factors which may affect that generalization, probably across factors, across nations, or even across economies? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think often we don't pay enough attention to generalizability concerns, and so it's with AI, it's a case of really trying to processing generalizability is a competence in itself, really, because when we see that the general claims are made about AI, we may question, what the contextual differences would be for different occupations. I think for me, the industry is an important level. So what industry are you talking about? If you look at legal work or professional work, like legal work, there are very specific concerns in environments like that about entire junior job roles or tasks being displaced by AI. And then there's a lot of fear and anxiety around that. And how that will change career paths and job roles. Whereas I've read that in other industries like retail, where people are working physically in retail, for example, they're not really thinking about AI very directly at all. They're saying, well, maybe it's something that will happen in the future. It's not affecting us today, so we're not really thinking about it. So I think whatever context you're in, you have to look at one approach is to look at people's beliefs and their awareness and their fears about AI, and to think about what's going on in the specific industry. What are the more specific conversations that are going on? You also mentioned countries and cultures, and I think that's really interesting as well. I mean, what regulatory frameworks are present in the particular country you're in? So, in the EU, the European Union, you've got the AI Act. But in other parts of the world, there may be other kinds of regulation developing. I guess one of the kind of, people can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the kind of conceptualizations of Indonesian culture is it's mobile first, it's very tech facing. So there might be maybe some greater embrace of the technology in certain economies and cultures. But I think we need to be very careful not to overgeneralize and just assume that things will be the same. So for me, industry specific understanding is really important, and occupations, professions, and cultures, mapping out the things like the regulatory frameworks and the concerns to get a more context specific picture, I think is a really important point. I don't know if that directly answers your question, but I think we do need to keep thinking about being wary of overgeneralizing and not overgeneralizing.
All right. Thank you, Tom and Bertrand, for the question and also the discussion. Now we have the next question from Fasan. Good afternoon, Fasan. Please tell us your name and your institution, then ask your question briefly.
All right. Could you guys hear me?
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Tom. That was a very insightful presentation. My name is Fasan. I'm from Indonesian Treasury. So my question is that our organization, Ministry of Finance, has had this several years of negative headcount growth. For example, about 1,000 fewer employees just last year, and retired employees are not replaced one-to-one scale, right? So my question is, what risk do you see, maybe both ethical or practical, when organizations rely on smaller workforces that are supported by analytics and technology and whatnot? And what do you think about the future-ready competencies that should our leaders or our managers develop to sense this risk early and maybe to respond constructively? Thank
Yeah,
you,
it's a
Tom.
really good question. I would just remind you of I know I had a lot of different topics, but I think in my slides where I talked about strategic workforce planning or SWP, I think this is the crucial competency. It's for leaders and managers. It's a stakeholder problem. I think lots of people need to come together. So again, different industries have different versions of this. So in the transport industry, sometimes there may be a struggle to recruit people to work in transport, or I've done work in the UK with the police, and the police are struggling with headcount and future skills. So they're struggling if they want to deal with cybercrime, but they can't have enough people with cybercrime skills because they all go and work for tech companies. They don't come and work for the police. That creates a high level of risk for them. So for me, the answer is strategic workforce planning competencies, to have a group of people in your organization made up of diverse stakeholders. It could be HR, it could be leaders and managers and operations, but they come together and they have a plan that they review on an annual basis around the gaps in their headcount. No one's saying it's easy, but if you think back to the slides, there are different levers to try and address them. If you over rely on tech, then the risk, which was your question, the risk is that you discover later on that the where you need human capability, the gaps re-emerge. And so you're relying on tech, but you discover that you need humans for other areas, but you don't have enough of them. That risk has become unacceptable. So trying to predict some of that risk before it becomes too severe means using a strategic workforce plan and taking a more phased, gradual approach to this. There is also the ethical concern that if you say, well, we're going to use tech to fill this gap, we don't need humans at all. It really depends on the context, but in some contexts you may have trade union problems, you may have activism or political challenges. There can be an ethical and political source of risk there as well. So if people see that the plan is to phase out human beings in the next 10 years, that's going to have a terrible ethical impression as a plan. And the ethos of SWP or strategic workforce planning is to take a balanced, sustainable approach. So yes, you use tech, but there are many other ways to address gaps. But you're also thinking more sustainably, and you're thinking about different scenarios as well. And one scenario is that there's a kind of rapid displacement of human capability to an unacceptable degree, and you're trying to mitigate against some of these more negative scenarios. So strategic workforce planning to prevent some of the risks associated, I think.
All right, thank you, Fasan, for the questions. Now we got the third questions. It's from Johanna. Hello, Johanna. You can introduce yourself to us, tell your name and institution, and then ask your questions briefly.
Okay, good morning, Tom. And it is an honor for me to hear a perspective on developing future competency for a transforming economy. My name is Joanna, and I'm from Ministry of Finance. Over the past decade, AI has advanced rapidly and can feel overwhelming for a government institution. And we keep struggle to keep the pace, and excessive reliance on AI could probably weaken employees' capabilities. So, in your view, to what extent should civil servants adopt AI in their daily work, given the risk of AI hallucinations? And considering, I try to take consideration from the UK CDPA, Copyright Designs and Patent Act. Could AI generated work in the civil service can be considered as a joint authorship under CDPA? I would really like to hear your opinion about this. Thank you so much, Tom.
It's a really good question. I'm not sure about the CDPA part. It seems like a difficult legal area because there's this shared accountability. And I think there are different ways of legally interpreting that. I remember with driverless cars, there was an example that if a driverless car has an accident, who is responsible for the accident legally? And I think, you know, there are parallels here with intellectual property and ownership. I mean, the short answer is it should very much be joint ownership, but I think we need new frameworks for how we weight that ownership, because there may be multiple parties. So in the case of a driverless car, who bears responsibility for an accident? It might be partly the driver, it might be partly someone else, it might be partly the manufacturer. So there could be multiple parties, and I think we do need an ecosystem approach. In terms of the earlier part of your question, I'll try and remember it right. I think it was about civil servants using it in their daily work and the kind of risk of hallucinations. It does come back to everything being a process. It's a change process. And so people need space to reflect and experiment on the process. They need to be agile. And so if there are hallucinations happening, people should be able to speak up about them and raise their concerns in the culture. What we're seeing in many contexts is that is a problem is this top-down, you must adopt AI, you must use it. And then people feel that they use it, but then they have concerns, but those concerns don't become part of the learning to actually improve the use of it. So we focus so much on adoption, we actually neglect the use part. And so the using part is really important, and it's an ongoing process. And so I think if you have an organization where people are using it, you shouldn't discourage them from adopting it, but you need to create spaces and a culture where people can say it's hallucinating and this is not okay. So we talk a lot about use cases. I guess you could have other devices. You could talk about abuse cases or misuse cases where, you know, the AI is really going wrong. So I think we do need kind of red flag, green flag systems for saying, well, okay, we're adopting AI and it's quite exciting, but we're also critically reflecting on where it is really letting us down and we need to improve versus where the best use is occurring. So I think it's a process of having the kind of adoption is stage one, but then in use, when it's in use on an ongoing basis, having a structure for learning and improving when the AI is in use. And I think we're quite bad at that because we're so busy. We've got to adopt it. We've got to use it, that we don't actually take a step back. But I think in the next decade, that will be a differentiator for companies, the ones that actually are able to reflect and learn from hallucinations and, you know, where the AI has gone wrong.
Thank you, Tom.
All right. Thank you, Johanna, for the question. All right, Tom, with the remaining 5 minutes, I think we'll take one final question. Is it all right?
Should we take one from the chat to be fair to the chat and the people who've written questions in the chat? But I don't mind either way. But
all right, we will see the Zoom chat or maybe YouTube chat first.
there are many great questions in the Zoom chat, and I'm
Yes.
sorry we don't have time to answer them all today.
I think we'll take from Yuanga. I will read it for you, Tom. But it's from Yuanga. The question is,
Oh.
what are the appropriate boundaries for the use of AI in decision-making process within public institution? And how should these boundaries be defined from an ethical perspective?
That's a really good question. It's a very difficult question. I think for me, the short answer is to keep looking at these regulatory frameworks which speak to exactly this question. So the EU European Union Act is one example. I'm sure there are many others, but first of all, you have to to define the boundaries, you have to define and classify the type of system and the type of decisions that are being made. If there are very basic decisions and they're defined as very basic procedures, then you can maybe make the decision that you can use AI 100%. It's not a problem. But for other categories and classifications of decision, it may become very, very ethically serious that you have to take what's often called a human in the loop approach or a human first approach. And, you know, the decision we often use as an example in my teaching in HR is if you're hiring somebody for a job. That is a very important decision for that human being. And so relying on AI exclusively to make that decision is not appropriate. You need a human in the loop, you need safeguards, but there are other criteria for defining these boundaries. So it's not a simple drawing of the boundaries. You might also look at the explainability of the AI, the potential for bias and skill degradation and other criteria. So I think my answer is to use regulatory frameworks, use a set of criteria to try and classify the different use cases and decisions that you're making. And some of those should be classified as low risk, some might be medium risk, but some will definitely be high risk and will require human intervention and a very responsible approach. So taking again a kind of red, yellow, green, low risk, medium risk, high risk approach. I think companies need those frameworks. They need to look at the regulations and take some sort of framework approach to defining those boundaries and considering multiple criteria in how they draw them. But thanks for a great general question there.
All right. Thank you, Tom, for all the comprehensive answers. And also thank you to all participants for your insightful questions and engaging discussion. We are truly sorry that we cannot take all of the questions to be answered. All right, Tom, would you like to share a brief closing statement to conclude our today's session?
Yeah, I'd just say thanks once again for the invitation. Thank you for all the great questions and for your attention throughout the many different topics that I tried to talk about. I think what you're doing with your Learning Festival Week is a great initiative. It actually relates to some of the things I talked about. So creating a dedicated space in your organizations, in your economies, so that people can come together, be exposed to different things, ask great questions, learn and discuss challenging topics is a really great initiative. I wish we had more Learning Festival Weeks in the UK like this. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your time. I'm sorry, again, I couldn't answer all your questions, but keep reflecting on them, keep thinking about AI and the human element and the future capabilities that will be needed. And don't be afraid to speak out and experiment and reflect on these challenging issues going forward. And so I wish you all the best for the future and enjoy the rest of your Learning Festival Week. Thank you.
All right. Thank you once again, Tom, for the enriching and insightful session. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause for Professor Tom Calvert. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a fruitful discussion today, and now we come to be the end of the CommentQ Learning Week Day 4. To all participants who join us, thank you for your active participation. Please remember to join the KLC course using the join code 042026 and complete the feedback form to receive your certificate. Before we officially conclude today's webinar, we would like to extend our deepest appreciation to our valued sponsors whose support has made this event possible. Our sincere thanks go to Bank Tabungan Negara, PT Sarana Multi Infrastruktur, Pusat Investasi Pemerintah, Indonesia Infrastructure Finance, PT Penjaminan Infrastruktur Indonesia, Bank Mandiri, Bank Rakyat Indonesia, Bank Negara Indonesia, dan Bank Syariah Indonesia. Your continued commitment and contribution to advancing knowledge, collaboration, and sustainable development are truly appreciated. We are grateful for your trust and partnership in making this webinar a success. Thank you once again for your generous support. Ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude this inspiring and enriching week, we take a moment to reflect on the journey we have shared. Over the past few days, we have explored new ideas, challenged assumptions, strengthened our competencies, and broadened our perspectives. ComQ Learning Week has not merely been a series of sessions, it represents our collective commitment to continuous learning and professional excellence. Stay safe and healthy. We look forward to seeing you again at ComQ Learning Week 2027. I am Nyayu. Good day and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Tom, for your time.